Low Effort Lore here, taking a look at Warhammer Fantasy, the 6th edition rulebook. As you may notice, I have half of a rulebook left. I've had this book for about 2 decades, 20 years. It's totally fallen apart at this point. I am buying a new one. It's on its way. I bought it online. But till then, we're going to use this for a quick little review. We're going to take a look at each of the armies and models shown here in the inside of the book. Unfortunately, the first half of the book, which is the part I don't have, is the part that covers a lot of the lore. But, you know, I have like a PDF I can refer back to, so we should be okay. I'm a little late to the party as far as Warhammer Fantasy and Old World content. The new game, The Old World, came out this weekend, so people are playing it right now. And because of that, I figure it's a good enough time as any to give my review and overview of the factions for Warhammer Fantasy. I'm going to be doing 6th edition because it's the edition I played, and it's very similar to the Old World rules. So with that, we are going to get into it by taking a look at Empire. Alright, so jumping right into it, we have the Empire. This is one of the main factions in 6th edition. A lot of the story is kind of told through the eyes of a Empire scholar as far as the lore in the 6th edition rulebook, core rulebook. I think it's a great jump-off place to understanding the setting. The Empire is located almost directly in the middle of everything. And a lot of the stories in some way or another have to interact with the Empire. They are reminiscent of like a medieval European kingdom. They have very basic guns, they have very basic pistols, but they're also using like foot soldiers with swords. I like it. I think the Empire is very cool. These are their sculpts from like 6th edition and earlier. I still think they hold up pretty darn well. It's pretty good looking stuff. I really like the artillery, the cannons, and all that good stuff. Recently they got like a range refresh for Age of Sigmar, which I assume you can use in the Old World, the new game. Empire is great. They in 6th edition you could their wizards could pick from all these different schools of magic. And yeah, it was interesting. Empire lore has always been interesting. It is, yeah, I would say it's like the main faction of Warhammer Fantasy. Yeah, there's not really much else to say about it. I mean, there's a ton to say about it, but we'd be here all day if we really went into Empire lore. I don't know if they exist in Age of Sigmar. I know there's it's called Cities of Sigmar now, and it's kind of like, I don't really know how to describe it. They're like Cities of Sigmar. It's kind of like the Empire, just a different name. So, moving on, we are going to go into Orcs and Goblins. Orcs and Goblins, I would say this is the other main faction of 6th edition. They were in the starter set along with Empire, I believe, and yeah, they're orcs. I don't know what more can be said. They're very similar to any other Games Workshop rendition of orcs. I feel like they're a little more serious than 40k orcs, maybe in some ways more than others. And they're a persistent threat in the Old World. They kind of rampage around, destroy everything. It's almost like a natural disaster when they attack, because there's not much you can do besides get out of the way. It is almost pointless trying to stop an orc invasion. It is better to just let them do what they're going to do and get far away from them and hope they don't head towards wherever you are. The 6th edition sculpts and models, they're very good. I think, a lot of this stuff is still sought after. It's nice to see the Old World is re-releasing some of this stuff. Some of the old metal and fine cast stuff. And then a lot of these older models are apparently being re-released, which I think is really cool because they're hard to get a hold of. People try to sell them for too much on eBay. And yeah, I love the Orc and Goblin stuff. I never played them. My best friend growing up would play them, and I would lose all the time. There was a rule where these goblin fanatics could hide inside your rank and file troops and like pop out, and that was a big problem for my vampire accounts because I didn't really know how to build a list back then. And long story short, I've always kind of resented orcs because I would get mercilessly beaten by them all the time. Um, let's see here, goblin shamans. Yeah, goblins. It's kind of split between orcs and goblins. They could both probably be their own armies in reality because there's a ton of models for each. You got like night goblins, you got black orcs, you have like savage orcs, which are really cool. They're kind of like, like shaman tribal orcs. It's cool stuff. I like it. We're gonna move on. All right, so moving right along, we get dwarves and Skaven. So as far as the dwarves go, I know next to nothing about them. I understand that they use like rune priest or something like that. I get that they don't use magic. They're good at like dispelling stuff. I know they live in mountains and they're good with like artillery and black powder weapons and stuff. Besides that, I know nothing about them. I think they have some of the nicest looking armies in fantasy and probably the old world. The soldiers rank up very nicely together, like we're showing right here. And I'm considering starting them. I'm going to read up on them a bit, see if I like the lore. Apparently, I'm doing myself a disservice by not really knowing about them. And yeah, I'm probably going to start them at some point. And with that, we are going to move to the next page and take a look at the Skaven. So Skaven are rat people. In Warhammer Fantasy, they're kind of like squabbling amongst themselves. They're living underground. I think they're kind of somewhat based on that movie, The Secret of Nim. They're very similar in how they use technology. That's an 80s movie. I'm sure there was some... I wouldn't be surprised if the game designers of Warhammer Fantasy watched The Secret of Nim at some point and took some inspiration from it. But I like Skaven. I know a whole lot about their lore. I think in the Storm of Chaos, I'm trying to remember what they were doing in that campaign. I think they were building like a nuclear weapon or something underground. Skaven are cool. Unfortunately, in the old world, they're not a core faction, which means I don't know what it means. I guess they're not getting support. But who knows? If the game's popular, that could change. Hopefully, it does. There's a lot of Skaven players who I'm sure would love to be included in the old world more. I think they're getting a range refresh at some point. But yeah, I don't really know what else to say about Skaven. They're fighting the Lizardmen. That's right. So they're having some type of battle with the Lizardmen, a specific type of Skaven, a clan Pestilence. Their Skaven is broken down into 4 great clans. Each one has its own kind of like wacky thing it does. Clan Pestilence is fighting the Lizardmen out in wherever, the New World. So that's a plot point, and I'm gonna keep it moving. Skaven is complex getting into, and yeah, we're gonna jump into the elves next. Elves this is gonna be an easy part because these are another 2 factions I don't know much about. I know high elves are the magic elves, and wood elves are the shooty bow and arrow elves with like forest stuff. I never collected these armies. My friends did growing up. I'd always play against them. I remember wood elves being very tricky to deal with in 6th edition. I'm going to show some of the models. I think personally that wood elves have like the coolest looking armies for this time period. They look phenomenal. If you get an entire wood elf army, you're going to have a good looking army. And then high elves, I also really like high elves. I don't know personally. I'm not a big elf person. For fantasy, I just don't know much about them. I know, actually, interestingly enough, I know high elves. They are like one of the only places that don't have chaos where they live. I'll show you. We're gonna look in the Beastmen army book of 6th edition. they have this nifty little map that shows like where chaos has infected the world. All those black blotches are like beastmen, warbands, and you can see in the middle in the island where the high elves live, there is no chaos. So, they must be doing something right. As far as wood elves, I know they fight the beastmen a lot. I play beastmen, so I know a little more about wood elves than the high elves, but still, I don't know much about them. I feel like I'd be doing a disservice really going into their lore that much. We're keeping these little segments short. This is a very general, brief overview. As some later videos, I'll like dive into these factions a little bit more in depth. But yeah, I think high elves and wood elves are both playable in the old world. They're both getting support, which is great. A lot of people love these factions, and I like playing against them, so that makes me happy too. Let's see who we got next. Chaos. Okay, we're gonna jump into Chaos. In 6th edition, I would play Beastmen, which meant I played Chaos, because at this time period in Warhammer Fantasy, you were able to mix and match Chaos Demons, Warriors of Chaos, and Beastmen. So, on these next 2 pages, we have Warriors of Chaos and Demons of Chaos. So, to kind of like break this down as easy as I can, Chaos is this persistent evil in Warhammer Fantasy. The Warriors of Chaos are the mortals who worship Chaos or serve it in one way or another. They live up north. They're kind of like these barbarians. They can put together these massive armies. They often suffer from mutation or, kind of like cancers or whatever, because they worship these evil entities, which are the demons. The demons are the manifestations of chaos in the mortal realm. Explaining this the best I can. So there is 4 chaos gods, which are the chief chaos deities. Each one of them represents a different aspect of like war or pestilence or magic, so on and so forth. Yeah, so I did not play Warriors of Chaos or Demons. I played Beastmen, but I had models from Demons and Warriors of Chaos because I could include them in my Beastmen army. I can include a demon by using an unliving idol, which is a magic item I could buy to make a demon my general. And then I'll show you from the Beastmen book, here's some great representations of everyone together. So you could really build these, amazing looking armies of Beastmen, Warriors, and Demons. They looked really good. I think you can still do this in like Age of Sigmar. There's more limitations on it. They made it so easy in 6th edition to kind of just like mix and match chaos stuff. As far as Warriors of Chaos and Demons, the models are great. I think 6th edition had and before had the best chaos stuff. This was right around the time where they were switching from the 2nd edition demons to the 3rd edition ones as far as like print editions. So right around this time was I'll show you a picture. These like crab demons down here. Soon after this, they got replaced with the other demonettes. I think the Diaz sculpt demonettes, the really famous ones. Yeah, so it was a good time for chaos. This was like peak chaos. Yeah, it was a good time to be a chaos player. I'll leave it at that. And oh, you know what? On the next page, I might as well include this. We got Beastmen, the other chaos faction. So these were the guys I played. Right in 6th edition, we had a major Beastmen update where all the Gores were replaced, Gores and Ungores, with newer models. We got new kind of Beastigores, which were Pestigores and Corngores, and some other funky stuff. Like I said before, you could mix and match chaos at this point. So Beastmen, I covered. I'm not going to dwell on them that much because I did a review of this book already. I like Beastmen. It's probably my favorite army. In sixth edition, they're kind of like some parallels between Gene Stealer cults of 40k and Beastmen, in that they're like this persistent threat that are infiltrating the realms of men, Bretonia and the Empire. And yeah, I got some photos of like where they are in the Empire, and yeah, they're kind of just like doing their thing. They're attacking the Empire from within, kind of. They're very persistent threat. Here we got our infestations of Beastmen. And yeah, if you want to see more of the Beastmen stuff, I did a whole video on their book. And we're gonna move on to, what do we got next? Undead. Vampire Counts and Tomb Kings. These are Vampire Counts was my other army. It was my first army. I as far as I know, I think it's one of the most popular Warhammer Fantasy armies, specifically the 6th edition Vampire Counts. This book right over here. I did another review of this book already, so we're not going to dwell that much on them. If I'm not mistaken, Vampire Counts and Tomb Kings used to be like one faction, I believe, and then they got split into two, which made sense because they were very different. So Vampire Counts are vampires, simple enough, and Tomb Kings are like mummies, I guess. Very popular. They were just re-released for the old world. Tons of people love them. So Tomb King history is actually interesting because when Age of Sigmar started and Fantasy ended, as far as I can tell, Tomb Kings were totally dropped as a faction. By popular demand, they are back in the old world. And not dropped like how Vampire Counts, I guess, were technically dropped also. But they were split into like 4 different factions or something. There's like Soul Blight, Flesh Courts, and some others, I guess. So it's nice to see all these factions back. Vampire Counts made a big return a few years ago. Great looking models. Same with Tomb Kings. And, if you can find these old Vampire Count models, get them if you can. They're great looking armies. They are just incredibly expensive to buy on eBay now. So I'm not going to buy them. I lost my army as a kid. It was my first army. And, yeah, as far as lore, Vampire Counts are persistently attacking the Empire from within. They are situated all over the old world. They can raise big armies of the undead. Here's a little map of, like, from the Vampire Counts book of where they are. Each of those stakes is a different vampire territory. And, yeah, they interact a lot with the Empire, obviously. I think an entire land of the Empire belongs to the Vampire Counts. As far as Tomb Kings, they are a little more removed from the setting, but they still, they'll march their armies up north and get into whatever shenanigans they get into. I don't know much about Tomb Kings. I should really read up on them. And, I think that covers most of the undead stuff. Let's see. Okay, Bretonians and Lizardmen are up next. Okay, up next we have Bretonia and Lizardmen. So these two armies in particular are well loved by the community. There are a ton of Lizardmen players, which are right over here. And then Bretonia is kind of having a resurgence. So I'm going to be honest, in 6th edition, I felt like no one played Bretonia. As far as in my area, my gaming circles as a kid in middle school, no one picked them. When you had a choice of like rat people and lizard people and demons and undead, like no one was going to pick the knights. And that's a shame because now as an adult, I really like Bretonia and I appreciate the models and the lore behind them is very, very interesting to me. They're kind of like the Empire, but more focused on knights. Their land is like right next to the Empire's land. There's a lot of like joined history. It's interesting. I'm happy that they're the main faction in the old world. One of the main factions. They're getting a ton of love right now. Yeah, I don't really know what more can be said about them. They're cool. They were another reason no one played them. at least in my area, is that they were very intimidating to paint. Like there's all these different, like colors and different coat of arms and stuff. It was like it was a lot. It was a lot for a kid to want to get into. So not many did. And then on the next page we have Lizard Men, which is the polar opposite. Everyone was playing these guys back in my area, and it's easy to see why, because they are giant lizard people, which is, very, very cool for a kid getting into Warhammer to get into. These guys were based in the New World, which is like across the sea. They interacted, like I said before, a lot with the Skaven. They were fighting the Skaven all the time. They kind of have temples. They're ruled by these like big frog people, the Slan. And in 6th edition, I believe the most expensive character in the game, point-wise, was a Slan priest who was like 1,200 points or something along those lines. Lizard men are cool. I like lizard men. So Bretonnia obviously is a big player in the old world. They're getting supported. Lizard men are not. And like I said before with the Skaven, it's probably because they got a new range of models recently, and I understand it's tricky because you don't want one game to cannibalize the other. I think lizard men are fine in Age of Sigmar. I hopefully at some point they'll get some kind of support for Old World, but I don't think we need to see like new models coming out for them or anything like that. Yeah, lizard men are great, and we're gonna move on to our final faction right now. Last but not least, we have Dark Elves, which are another army I never played, but I do play Drukhari in 40k. I've played them for decades, and there's a lot of similarities between Dark Elves and fantasy and the Drukhari. They both take slaves. They're both evil elves. They both kind of like go on these raiding parties to get captives. They both kind of have like witch groups, witch elves that operate within the greater Dark Elf society, kind of like the witch cults of 40k. In fantasy, they're called witch elves or something like that. So here's the army. Very cool looking. So this is another army that it's in fantasy. They're not being supported in the old world. They are... Okay, and the reason for this, from what I understand, is that Age of Sigmar kind of split this army up in a similar way that happened to Vampire Counts, where like the Witch Elves became the Daughters of Cain, which is its own thing, and then I think the bulk of the Dark Elves went into Cities of Sigmar, which I don't know how I feel about. I understand like there was probably some choice there, but I really like Dark Elves operating as one cohesive, group. I like that how the lore interacted, and yeah, it's nice to see that they're getting rules for fantasy. They're not being supported though, which is a shame. That's one I would like to see change over time. I think it would be great to see there be a Dark Elf release for the old world. They were always like a staple faction of Warhammer Fantasy. Just as much as the High Elves and Wood Elves were. It's a little jarring to see like High Elves and Wood Elves are being supported and Dark Elves weirdly are not. But I understand there's considerations to make and all that good stuff. So we also have a nice piece of Dark Elf artwork over here. It's one I think you've probably seen a bunch of times. It's some Dark Elf sorceresses fighting with that might be Bretonnia or the Empire. Really cool looking stuff. And then, just to look at the models again, we got some harpies. Dark Elves would have these really interesting crossbow units. And I love the army. I always wanted to collect them. I could never afford getting into them. And, that's about it. I won't dwell too much on them. Alright, so that's about it for this low effort video here. I only spent around 2 minutes on each faction. I'm going to do a more in-depth video about the lore. At some point, I'll probably record it tomorrow morning. Kind of like dive into the actual lore. This was just a very brief overview. I'm going to try to get these videos more consistent. I'm going to spend some time working on this channel when I'm not working at my day job. I feel like this is a good time just because of the release of the Old World, and I feel like more people are looking into fantasy than ever before. And yeah, if you managed to get to the end of this video, I thank you. And yeah, I'll be uploading more in the future. I'm gonna get a better camera at some point.